organizing this program, Mark Bonham, Dimitri Anastaskas, and I thought it was important to recognize those who came before us and upon whose shoulders we stand. So it is my honor to present this memorial to Chris Kobrak and Michael Bliss. Canadian business history suffered two great losses this year. In January, Chris Kobrak, the first holder of the Wilson Currie Chair in Canadian Business History at the Rotman School. In May, Michael Bliss, University of Toronto Emeritus Professor, also died. Chris and Michael were very different people, other than they both had an affection for baseball, and they held strong views, which they articulated forcefully and well. Chris, eclectic is the word best used to describe Chris Kobrak. Chris was an American, a New Yorker born and bred. His father was a German Jew who managed to get out of Germany in the 1930s and to fight for the U.S. forces against the Nazis. His mother was an Irish Roman Catholic, a diverse background. Chris did his BA at Rutgers, became a CPA, and obtained an MBA from Columbia, where he also obtained his PhD. He worked in industry, and then for the last, before coming to Rotman, taught at the École Supérieure Commerce de Paris, Europe, for nearly a quarter of a century. He came to Rotman first as a visiting professor, and then as the first holder of the Wilson Currie Chair. Chris is much better known outside of Canada than he is in Canada. The British Business History Association dedicated a session to him at their June meeting in Glasgow, and the European Association dedicated their whole conference to him 3 weeks ago in Vienna, and the next section of Enterprise and Society will be dedicated to Chris. But in his too short stay in Canada, he not only taught MBA students, but also managed to get business history taught in commerce, and in the last academic year, this course was offered to both commerce and liberal arts students. Chris was the inspiration for the creation of the Canadian Business History Association, modeled on a comparable German association. We all wanted him to be chair, but he insisted that Dimitri, a Canadian, should have that role. That was evidence of both his wisdom and selflessness. When the board met in February 2017, after his death, we unanimously passed a resolution naming our recently created research fellowship of the CBHA-ACHA Chris Kobrak Research Fellowship, which we'll be presenting tonight. And then we adjourned to the Duke of York, a haunt much favored by Chris, where we raised a glass or two to him. Chris and I not only talked together, but we also wrote a book together, From Wall Street to Bay Street, a comparison of the U.S. and Canadian financial systems. He died 3 weeks before the manuscript was to be submitted to UTP. With difficulty, the book was completed in February for the external reviewers. It passed with flying colors, and Amazon is advertising it as being available in December. Chris and I decided to dedicate the book to our students, past, present, and future. So since I could not dedicate the book to Chris, I wrote a foreword about him which included this sentence. In addition to a passion for business history, Chris and I have similar political views and, more importantly, loved the great game of baseball. And while he was a longtime Yankee fan, and I have been a Blue Jay fan since they arrived on the scene in '77, we enjoyed going to games together, often with supporters of the Red Sox. As my wife Sally observed, when Chris arrived in Toronto to take on his professional responsibilities at Rotman, it quickly became clear that he would become not just my husband's respected and valued professional colleague, but a new family friend. Notwithstanding his impressive intellectual achievements, clearly family and friendships were always of central importance to Chris. His legendary generosity, genuine curiosity, an enthusiastic embrace of the peculiarities of Canadian culture, from hockey games to politics to shopping at IKEA, made its own indelible and welcome imprint on our lives. Above all, Chris simply filled up the room with his warmth, expansive personality, and good humor. And this is a conference about business, not politics. But I have inferred that Chris was a Republican. And furthermore, he did not like the Clintons. But in March of last year, he said, if this guy Trump gets the Republican nomination, I'm going to have to vote for Hillary. And he did. I was with him on voting day. He voted a straight Republican ticket other than the presidency. For Chris, it was not about policy, it was about character. Michael Bliss was a Canadian, but if he'd been born any further south than Kingsville, he would have been an American. I guess that's not quite right. From Kingsville, you have to drive north to Detroit, the closest big city. His parents were many generations Canadian, but border people, in Michael's words, moving easily in and out of the U.S. In Kingsville, he met Liz, and together they had 3 children and enjoyed life in their summer retreat in Prince Edward Island. Michael is well known in Canada. He had an extraordinary career and received all kinds of recognition. He was a university professor of this university, an officer of the Order of Canada, a prolific author of award-winning history books in the fields of politics, business, and medicine. He was also a public intellectual, appearing in a wide variety of media, print and electronic. And while he was very well known in Canada, he traveled extensively in the United States and Europe, giving lectures on medical history, more specifically the discovery of insulin. Michael received his education in 2 places, Kingsville and the University of Toronto, where he received a BA, an MA, and a PhD, as well as an honorary degree. 5 other Canadian universities in 4 different provinces conferred an honorary degree on Michael. While Michael stopped doing business history more than a quarter of a century ago, you would not know that if you mentioned his name among Canadian business leaders. When Northern Enterprise, 5 centuries of Canadian business, appeared 3 decades ago, it was described as a path-breaking volume, which is the first overview of the subject. It is a formidable success. I was so excited about it, I bought 100 copies to distribute to the partners and principals of the consulting firm where I was partner in charge. When we began the business history program at Rotman, Michael not only gave a guest lecture, but he also donated his formidable collection of business history to our library. If you had time, you might want to go to the 5th floor and look at it. As we organized this conference, we discussed who we wanted as the keynote speaker. Michael's name was at the top of the list. I phoned him with great trepidation. No other acquaintance of mine took retirement as seriously as Michael. But we wanted him, and I was very concerned that he would reject it out of hand. We had our usual dialogue about how he was out of touch with the field, but I finally convinced him to consider it. The next day, to my astonishment, an email arrived. Joe, as I'm sure you realized, I wouldn't turn you down. I didn't know that, but I was really pleased. I'll be happy and honored to give a keynote at your conference in September. My ideas are so old and forgotten that they'll seem new again. He went on, I need my memory refreshed on the details of our phone conversation. I know you want about a 30-minute talk, and I think you implied carte blanche for an overview of 150 years of Canadian business history. Please confirm, which I quickly did. That was on February 2nd. In late April, I received word he was not well. He wrote, ever since agreeing to speak at your conference, I've worried particularly about that engagement, and I've gone round and round on whether I should cancel. It's only one of 2 that hasn't been erased from the calendar. I haven't wanted to mess things up for you by canceling, though I've taken heart with your comment that it would be a relatively easy gig. I was going to talk a lot about having a being a Canadian business historian 150 years ago, and think that by September I should be okay for one more last hurrah. So I've left it in the books, waiting for word like this from you. Then, after some personal discussion, he came up with one of those sentences for which he was justly famous. I hope this is clear, albeit obviously provisional. We're both in the provisional years, Joe. I didn't need reminding. Though perhaps not as provisional as a lot of people who have spectacular sinking feelings this week as home capital collapses, home capital ? Home bank ? But it was not to be. As we all know, death waits for no man. We in the history community, more specifically the Canadian business history community, have lost two outstanding practitioners. While this is not obviously a religious ceremony, I would like to read a short bit from Ecclesiastes, the preacher, not Ecclesiastes 3, which is better known, the one that goes to everything there is a season and a time to every purpose under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die. But rather Ecclesiastes 44, which is much less known but is applicable to both Chris and Michael. Ecclesiastes 44 in honor of our ancestors. Let us now praise famous men and our fathers who begat us, leaders of the people. By their counsels and by their knowledge of learning, wise and eloquent are their instructions. There be of them that have left a name behind them, that their praises might be reported. The people will tell of their wisdom, and the congregation will show forth their praise. Can I ask you to bow your head and observe a minute of silence in their memory?